Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's Aces High, and today we're going to be continuing our Roman history Julius Caesar type moment. I've actually decided to combine two of the videos into one video today. So, just because the first video that I want to move into is titled the Pontifex Maximus, and it's actually only a 6-minute video. So from there, in the same video, I'm just going to roll straight into a 14-minute video called His Year Cicero, and it's kind of when the history of Rome kind of takes off. It takes place in 63 BC. So yeah. Anyway, this channel, they're awesome. Love them. Historia Civilis. I gotta thank Sebastian, one of my subscribers, for recommending this playlist. I gotta thank all my. I mean, I've had 3 or 4 subscribers from really early. Just all of you guys have just been helping me out. You've been telling me what you would like to watch and what you think are good and bad things, and it is just awesome. I really, really appreciate it. That being said, before we get into this, if you guys haven't subbed, hit that sub button, ring the bell. It really does help me out. I'm really trying to reach that 1,000 subs. I've only been around for 9 weeks or so, so I think 380 subs isn't bad, but 1,000's better. That being said, I'm gonna sit back, I'm gonna shut up, and let's get started with the first one.
In 63 BCE, at the age of 36, Julius Caesar shocked everybody by announcing that he was running for the office of Pontifex Maximus. He was still a minor political figure. He had not yet served his term as praetor.
Maybe I missed it, and if I did miss it, if they're not going to say it in a second, then let me know in the comments. But when we were watching the political one, the Pontifex Maximus, I don't remember them mentioning that.
He took on massive debts in order to finance this campaign, and when his political elders tried to convince him to get out of the race, he redoubled his efforts and threw himself even further into debt.
Wow.
On election day, according to Plutarch, Caesar told his mother something along the lines of, "Today, you will either see me as Pontifex Maximus or go into exile." He won a close 3-way race. This electoral victory would have repercussions for centuries. So what was the Pontifex Maximus?
Yeah.
Let's put it in the simplest possible terms. He was the highest elected religious official in the Roman Republic, and once elected, he served for life. You'll notice that I threw a caveat in there, elected. Maybe it won't surprise you to learn that it gets more complicated when you look into it. There was one person that outranked the Pontifex Maximus. He was called the Rex Sacrorum, which is deceptively hard to say. It means something like the King of the Sacred. Once appointed, he also served for life. Kinda. The Rex Sacrorum was actually itself a split position, consisting of a husband and wife team. The wife was called the Regina Sacrorum, and she had duties separate from her husband. One could not exist without the other, so if one of the two died or the couple got divorced, the position was vacant and a new couple was appointed.
Was divorce really that a thing back then? I know that with a lot of religions and things like that, it became not really okay for a while. But I know that way back in the past, people did get divorced. So I guess it was just okay in ancient Greece or ancient Rome.
The official job of the Rex and Regina Sacrorum was to keep the gods happy. Full stop, that's it. What that meant in practice was that they were each responsible for performing many complicated religious ceremonies, including animal sacrifices. They also had to live a pure life, which meant a lot of things, but most importantly, it meant that politics and the military were completely off limits. The Rex Sacrorum was undeniably a powerless figurehead. But let's put that to the side. Let's look at the Pontifex Maximus's actual responsibilities. I'd say his most meaningful job was regulating public morality. He was a watchdog over the Roman people and, more importantly, over its politicians. He had the power to unilaterally issue fines whenever he decided that somebody violated a religious custom or a cultural taboo.
That seems like an abnormal amount of power, you know? I mean, look at all the different layers. We talked about this in one of the previous videos, and I mean, you're able to give out fines to anybody, basically.
Along the same lines, he was also authorized to go before the Senate and speak on legislation, representing a group called the College of Pontiffs.
Oh, wow.
What was the College of Pontiffs? This was a group of pontiffs or priests that met with the Pontifex Maximus behind closed doors to vote on new laws that would govern religious life or public morality. It's important to note that once these laws were agreed upon and publicly announced by the Pontifex Maximus, they had the force of law, and the Senate had no say in the matter. In the beginning, there were 5 in the college, later 9, and by the late Republic, 15.
Wow.
These pontiffs had some other duties, like serving as judges in religious court cases, although it's unclear how common this was. They're most
Is that kind of where the idea of our Supreme Court came from? Because one person, I don't remember who it was off the top of my head. Maybe it was Eugene in the comments, but somebody commented and said that when the American government was founded, the founding fathers tried to take a lot of ideas from ancient Rome society, and then tweak it in their own way. For instance, they said, the person that commented said, you couldn't have weapons inside of the city of Rome, but it ended up being a problem down the road. So our founding fathers in America decided everybody has the right to bear it, to have a weapon. So they tweaked it in that sense. But a lot of their government, they said they were saying kind of set up similar to Rome. And I mean, this just kind of sounds like the Supreme Court in a sense. It's interesting. Because, I mean, the Supreme Court can rule something that the Senate can't stop very easily, if at all, and they're made up of, I mean, it's different. It was like, I think it's been as little as 4 or 5, and it's been as much as, I think 11, but they tried to make it 15 at one point, but it's been 9 for a long time, so 9 people sitting on there voting on court cases.
important job was becoming experts on Roman religious law and guiding the Pontifex Maximus. Keep in mind that these pontiffs were expected to have normal political careers, and their role on the College of Pontiffs was kind of a side gig. Just like the Pontifex Maximus, pontiffs served for life. When a pontiff died, the college voted internally to select his replacement. New pontiffs were usually picked from prominent families at a young age, and trained on the job by their colleagues. Briefly, in the late Republic, new pontiffs were elected by the people, but that reform didn't last long. The Pontifex Maximus also oversaw a group called the Flamen. These men were also priests, but appointed directly by the Pontifex Maximus for life. There were 15 of them, each the head of a cult devoted to a different deity. The Flamen to Jupiter, Mars, and Romulus were the 3 most prestigious ones, and were usually given to members of prominent families. Unlike the pontiffs, Flamen were subject to a litany of religious restrictions. For example, it was forbidden for them to see a dead body, or to travel outside of Rome. This meant that while they were technically allowed to have political careers, all of the good stuff was off limits. Also, they weren't allowed to see a table without food on it, which might be the world's worst superpower. I can't decide if it would be more annoying to know a Flamen or to be a Flamen. The Pontifex Maximus was also responsible for appointing Vestal Virgins, which was an order of women that maintained an eternal flame in the center of the city. These were easily the most powerful women in Rome. They could own property, vote, and even free slaves at will.
Wow.
Each one was appointed for 30 years, but most chose to stay on after their time was up. The Pontifex Maximus worked right next door to the Temple of Vesta, in a building called the Regia, which had once been the site of the royal palace during the monarchy. This was where the College of Pontiffs met. It's also where Rome housed its official calendar, which was so broken that the Pontifex Maximus needed to manually add days to the end of every year in order for it to make sense.
I thought the Roman calendar had 13 months. 13 that were evenly split at 28 days or something like that. Yeah, it'd be 28 days times 13. And then every month would be the same. But I guess not. So they basically came up with our modern calendar, huh? Or somewhat similar, it looks like. I guess they're missing quite a few days.
This was also where Rome's most sacred artifacts were kept. Perhaps most famous were the Spears of Mars, which were said to vibrate whenever Rome was about to befall some disaster. We are told that Caesar saw them vibrating the night before his own assassination. Speaking of which, after Caesar's assassination, one of his deputies, Lepidus, was elected the new Pontifex Maximus. This same Lepidus became the junior member of the Second Triumvirate, with Octavian and Mark Antony. After Octavian became the Emperor Augustus and consolidated power, he forced Lepidus to move to the countryside, where he retained his title but no influence.
Really?
Years later, when Lepidus died of old age, the office passed to Augustus without much fuss, and the headquarters of the Pontifex Maximus quietly moved from the Regia to the new imperial palace. And for the next 400 years, that's where it stayed.
Huh. Alright, you guys, let's have a chat about that real quick, and then we'll move on to our second video. What'd you think? It's definitely a title that I think is going to be really important, kind of just for basic history and before we dive into the Roman history, and I'm glad I watched it. That being said, it seems like a kind of overly powered title. It seems like you have a lot of power when you're there. Anyway, let's just move right into our second video. This one's going to be his year, Cicero, 63 BC.
When it was time to nominate candidates for the consular election of 63 BCE, the conservatives in Rome were in a tough spot. Many of the older conservatives still had the stink of Sulla's reign of terror on them, which is this whole can of worms that I'm not going to get into today, and the generation that had come of age after Sulla was still too young to be eligible for higher office. In desperation, the conservatives turned to this young senator from an unknown family named Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero was from a small town in central Italy, and rose to prominence as a lawyer and later as a skilled administrator.
See, I've actually heard of Cicero. Maybe it's not the same one, it probably is, but I've definitely heard that name, I just don't know anything about him.
Cicero was a citizen, but not Roman in the sense of being from the city of Rome, and everybody could tell. His detractors would call him a foreigner and an immigrant for most of his life. Supporting Cicero was a bit of a gamble for the conservatives. He had a reputation for being a constitutionalist and for being against corruption and bribery, but he was still an outsider. Would he respect the Senate's prerogatives? What they didn't know at the time and what we know now is that Cicero favored stability and order and peace above all else. They had all lived through this painful civil war, and Cicero believed that Rome's constitution was the best defense against another one. So the conservatives backed Cicero. It's not like they had much of a choice. The other two major candidates for consul that year were Catilina, aka Catiline, who was one of the leaders of the Reform faction, and Antonius, the uncle of Marcus Antonius, aka Mark Antony, Caesar's future right-hand man. Antonius was loosely aligned with the reformers, but in my opinion, just seemed like an ambitious idiot. More on him later. Cicero didn't have a lot of money to spend on this campaign, so he did something as old as politics itself. He attacked the character of his two opponents. He was particularly brutal when it came to Catilina. He accused him of deliberately stealing from non-Romans during Sulla's dictatorship, which is just another way of saying, hey, non-Roman citizens, I'm one of you, vote for me. He constantly reminded voters that his opponents were complicit in the dictatorship, while Cicero had kept his hands clean. And even more, he accused both of them of being close friends with a young Julius Caesar, who was running for praetor that year and was already a very polarizing figure. Cicero also fought hard for the support of the wealthy business class. Some of the more radical reformers were making them nervous, and they were open to supporting someone like Cicero, promising stability. Cicero won in a landslide. Antonius came second, and he would serve as Cicero's co-consul. He was less strongly associated with Sulla than Catilina was, which I think explains his win. Catilina was understandably upset by his third-place finish. He was arguably Rome's most prominent reformer. It was humiliating. He still had his seat in the Senate, but he immediately began preparing to run for consul again next year. When Cicero took office in January of 63 BCE, he did something so incredibly smart that I can't believe it didn't become common practice. He was assigned one of the best provinces to govern after his term, Macedonia. He went to Antonius and was like,
Really?
hey, you want to trade? They negotiated a deal. If Antonius stayed out of Cicero's way all year, he could have Cicero's province. This is the last time you'll hear about Antonius in this video, but he was around, just doing whatever Cicero told him to do. The first major problem to confront Cicero is something we're all familiar with now: land reform. It was 4 years before Caesar's year as consul, and the land reform was still the perennial objective of the reformers.
Yeah.
Cicero had no interest in bringing this issue up, but it was proposed by one of the new tribunes of the plebs. Cicero had to figure out how to deal with it. The actual bill was kind of similar to the land reform bills that Caesar would later pass, only smaller in scope. A commission, 10 members this time, were to buy up land and redistribute it via lottery to the urban poor. In order to pay for this, the commission was
Really?
authorized to sell publicly owned land in Italy and abroad.
That's interesting. Get it up as a lottery to the poor. That's super interesting. That's wow. Could you imagine if they did that today? Really anywhere?
At the time, Cicero thought that Caesar was secretly behind this bill, but he had no proof. Based on the similarities between this bill and the one that Caesar would later pass, we can look back with some hindsight and say that, yeah, he was probably right. Cicero did everything he could to turn public opinion against this bill. He went around stirring up old fears, calling the 10 commissioners the 10 kings. He did his job, because the Senate voted down the bill and there was very little public backlash. The downside of all of this is that the reformers now saw Cicero as an arch-conservative, which honestly he really wasn't. He was an institutionalist, and his problem with land reform was just that it was destabilizing. Cicero may have been consul, but he was still a lawyer at heart. He spent a lot of time in the courts during his year, serving as the defense attorney in 2 major cases. The first was some really stupid case where some of the reformers accused a conservative senator of a murder 37 years ago. It was a big, stupid, politically motivated thing. The guy was innocent and everybody knew it. Cicero saw it as his duty as consul to defend the senator. The case ended just as stupidly as it began, when Cicero and his allies deliberately caused a mistrial by using some arcane legal nonsense. The guy got off, but I mean, if you ask me, nobody really walked away from it looking particularly great. Cicero's second legal case will come later, but first he had to oversee the elections for next year's consuls. Cicero learned from his intelligence network, or more accurately, I would say his wife's intelligence network, that Catilina, the guy who came in third last year and was a candidate again this year, was plotting a series of assassinations on election day. When election day
Jeez.
came, Cicero openly wore body armor, something you weren't really supposed to do, and showed up with a gang of bodyguards. For whatever reason, maybe the assassins were intimidated by this show of force, violence was averted. Cicero oversaw the election of his 2 successors, and in a cruel twist of fate, Catilina came in third again. Apparently, he pretty much bankrupted himself paying out bribes. He didn't have the means to run for consul a third time. Cicero's second legal case came up after the elections and was a lot more consequential. One of the losers of the consular election was accusing one of the winners of bribery and wanted the results thrown out. This had the potential of being really destabilizing. Bribing people during elections was very illegal and very common. Everybody did it. Cicero had even campaigned against bribery, while his conservative backers continued to bribe everybody behind the scenes. It was inescapable. Cicero's logic was, if we start throwing out election results because of bribery, every future election would be followed by a court case. He chose...
That's a good point, but that's also a bad excuse. You know? Oh yeah, if we throw it out because they broke the rules, then we're always going to have to throw it out. Well, how about we work on people not breaking the rules?
to lead the defense. Cato, the arch-conservative, represented the prosecution. It got ugly. Cato went on and on about how corruption and bribery had seeped into Roman public life, which all happened to be true. Cicero responded by not addressing the facts of the case, because, again, the defendant was definitely guilty, and just mocked Cato to his face. He called his philosophy silly. He called him unrealistic. He even made an obnoxious appeal to nationalism, saying something along the lines of, "This isn't Greece. Here in Rome, things get messy, but things get done." Cicero won the case, but ugh, gross. After this, in a kind of symbolic gesture to prove that he wasn't pro-bribery, Cicero introduced and passed a law that increased the punishment for blatant bribery to up to 10 years of exile.
Wow.
Again, this was symbolic and more of a message to future candidates, saying, okay guys, pull back on the bribery a bit, it's getting out of control. In October, after all of the turmoil with the elections was finally put to rest, Crassus, a senator from the Reform faction, came to see Cicero. He showed Cicero a letter he had received, telling him of a secret plan to overthrow the government, masterminded by Catilina. Around the same time, Cicero started to hear reports of a small army mustering north of Rome. These two things had to be linked. Cicero presented his evidence to the Senate and placed Catilina under house arrest. As a precaution, the Senate passed a law called the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, aka the final decree or the final act, which empowered the consuls to do whatever was necessary to defend the Republic. Think of it as a form of martial law. Cicero's wife's spies learned that one night, Catilina slipped his guards and attended a meeting where, again, a plot was hatched to assassinate Cicero. After learning of this, Cicero put his home on lockdown, and his gang of bodyguards wouldn't let anybody through without the right password. This seems pretty basic to us, but Roman homes were normally open to the public, and the act of giving a password like this was a well-known military tradition. Cicero basically transformed his home into a military encampment. The symbolism wasn't lost on anybody. At the next meeting of the Senate, Cicero put forward a bill to banish Catilina. He was empowered to do whatever he deemed necessary under the final act, but he wanted to stay on the same side as the Senate. Unfortunately, nobody wanted to put themselves on the record against Catilina. Cicero, realizing that he had misread the room, quickly switched tactics and was like, okay, how about we banish this random other senator instead? The Senate was like, but he did nothing wrong. And Cicero was like, aha, so you admit Catilina did something wrong. Not Cicero's finest moment. In the end, he was right though, because Catilina fled the city that night and joined up with the army in the north, and declared himself the head of the new government in waiting. The situation was now on the precipice of civil war. Sometime later, one of Catilina's allies in the city went to a diplomat from a Gallic tribe visiting Rome and was like,
I wonder what size army Rome would have at that time, because they wouldn't have it in Rome, but I mean outside of Rome, protecting Rome type of thing, you know?
hey, we're going to overthrow the government, let's team up. The diplomat went directly to Cicero and reported to him what had happened. Cicero was like, no, go along with it. Now he had a spy on the inside of the conspiracy. The Gallic diplomat set up a big meeting with a bunch of conspirators to coordinate their plans. And when everybody showed up, Cicero was there with his bodyguards, and all of the traitors were arrested. Cicero went before the Senate and said that he wanted these guys put to death. His argument was that the city was a powder keg, and they had no way of knowing how deep the conspiracy went.
I wonder what put to death was back in the day. What was the death penalty at the time, you know? I mean, obviously it wasn't the electric chair or firing squad or anything yet.
If they executed these leaders, it might be enough to put an end to the whole rebellion and avert a war. Remember, the Senate had already empowered Cicero to do whatever was necessary to keep the Republic safe, so he was not required to get the Senate's permission for any of this. But Cicero believed in the Senate, and he didn't want to go against their wishes. Both of the incoming consuls agreed with Cicero, put the prisoners to death. All of the ex-consuls agreed as well.
Wow.
So did all of the praetors. When it came time for the incoming praetors to weigh in, Julius Caesar rose to speak. Caesar argued that executing these men without a trial was an authoritarian thing to do, and it set a dangerous precedent for the future. He suggested that instead they should be sentenced to life imprisonment. This argument made Cicero suspicious. Remember, Caesar was friends with Catilina. How much was he involved in all of this? But Caesar's appeal against authoritarianism was well received by the Senate, and a majority of them began to come around to his idea of imprisonment. After they heard speeches from all of the ex-praetors, aediles, ex-aediles, and quaestors, they finally got all the way down to the ex-quaestors, which was when Cato got to speak. Cato was only 32 years old at this time, but he was already cultivating one hell of a reputation. He chastised the Senate for putting the entire Republic at risk for the sake of their weak stomachs. Cato, for once in his life, urged them to be pragmatic. He argued that eliminating the threat and preserving the Republic was the highest priority, and if the Senate woke up tomorrow to find the city in flames, they would have nobody to blame but themselves. The mood in the Senate shifted yet again. Cato had convinced them. A vote was called, and the Senate voted in favor of executing the prisoners. Caesar went into a frenzy. He started screaming and launched himself at the opposition. His supporters tried to hold him back, and suddenly everybody was on their feet as a bit of a fight broke out on the floor of the Senate. Cicero called for his bodyguards. They entered, swords drawn, and surrounded the senators. There was a tense...
Oh, I guess he could have the swords and everything because he was given that authority, but I was just thinking, isn't that like a no-no, you know?
Standoff. After a beat, Caesar turned and stormed out of the Senate House. He would not return again while Cicero was consul. Let me pause here for a moment. Understand how shocking this was. Swords were forbidden inside the city of Rome, but at some point, Cicero had secretly armed his men. Even more shocking was the fact that there was almost bloodshed on the floor of the Senate, and there
Yeah,
was
that's what I'm
almost
saying.
Caesar's blood. Let's just sit with that for a minute. Cicero left the Senate, followed by a horde of senators, and went to retrieve all of the prisoners from the homes where they were being locked up. He led them down to the Roman jail. Side note, I just learned this. The jail was actually an old converted cistern, like for holding water, so you could only enter it through the roof. Pretty cool.
That is cool.
Anyway, Cicero and the senators led the prisoners onto the roof of the jail. One by one, they tied nooses around their necks and had them jump in. After the last
Oh my
conspirator
God.
was dead, Cicero turned to the crowd and announced what he had just done. When the rebel army to the north heard what had happened to their leaders, most of them fled. The Senate sent an army of their own to deal with them, and it was just a one-sided slaughter. Catiline and the rest of the leaders of the conspiracy died on the battlefield. The Senate declared that for his actions, Cicero was to be honored with the title of Father of the Republic. At this point, Cicero's term was nearly over, but for his remaining days as consul, a crowd would follow him wherever he went, cheering and applauding. Cicero would consistently call this the proudest moment of his life.
Interesting. Oh, I guess that's it. All right, well, let's have a chat about that. I'm excited because the next video that we're going to be watching, I believe next in line is Cato. I'm not 100% sure, but it takes place like a year later, 62 BC. Yeah, it's kind of cool to actually get into the videos where it's showing off the people finally, you know. It's really explaining the history, and it's crazy. I think the thing that blows me away the most is that he was able to arm his men and almost kill people on the Senate floor. Like, that just seems like the ultimate rule breaking as far as like Roman rules, you know? I don't know. It's interesting. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Join me next time. Till then, this is Ace. I love y'all. And I'm out.